Hello, book lovers, and welcome to the 140th episode of Authors Love Bookstores from a Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Joe Moldover, and I'm delighted to be back here with you today. Every week, we crisscross America as I and my partner, Kimberly Hensel-Lawrence, interview authors and the independent booksellers they love. And today, at long last, for the very first time, we are in the old line state of Maryland at Greedy Reads Books in Baltimore. We are joined by Greedy Reads owner, Julia Fleischacre. Julia, hello.
Hi,
Thank you for being here.
hello. Thank you for having me.
And by author Laura Lippman. Laura is an author who genuinely needs no introduction. I will make an effort at an abbreviated one. Laura Lippman is one of the most widely respected and read novelists working in America today. She has won virtually all major awards and honors for mystery and suspense novelists, including the Edgar, the Anthony, the Agatha, all the big ones. She just as of yesterday published her 29th book, Prom Mom. We're going to be able to talk about that. A little known author and critic named Stephen King says that Laura is special, even extraordinary, and it is the case. And Laura, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Hey, well, really, thank you for having me. I like what y'all do, and I like the fact that you're highlighting all these great bookstores.
Well, we love it, and we're with Greedy Reads today because you selected them, and I wonder if you would begin by telling us why. What is so special about this bookstore?
Well, they're two greedy reads in Baltimore, and first of all, they're special because they are part of the reason that Baltimore has become a great book town, which 10, 15 years ago was not necessarily the direction we were heading in. This was not always a great book town, and it's almost an embarrassment of riches, and Greedy Reads is definitely part of that. Greedy Reads was very much my pandemic bookstore. They had a great system. I still rely on them a lot because I love the fact that I can order the books at home and then go pick them up. I don't know why I love that so much, but it's something. And also they have a branch that I can walk to. I'm a huge walker. So between those two things, they're very convenient. There's one I can walk to, and there's one that was super convenient to where my daughter went to Hebrew school. And between those two things, it was a place where I sought a lot of escape during the darkest days of 2020 and 2021.
Got it. Well, we will be talking a little bit more about that, including the role of the pandemic and 2020, 2021 in your new book, Prom Mom. Julia, though, I'd love to hear from you. What's your take on the Baltimore book scene? Laura's talking about its evolution over the last decade. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting for me to hear that because I kind of always thought that Baltimore was a great, underrated book town. I was a book publicist before I moved here, and so I had come through here with authors on tour before, kind of on the other side of the equation.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I opened that I kind of say this all the time, but it's really true that one of the things that I think is really special about Baltimore is that the literary scene and the book world isn't a walled off or kind of gated community in Baltimore. It really feels woven into the fabric of everyday life here in a way that I've never experienced. I mean, I've worked in publishing for 20 years before I did this, and it feels different to me in that sense. It's just feels always there. I might be biased because I own a bookstore, but it does really feel that way to me. And, I was the sole employee for a year and a half, so I saw a lot of people coming through and had a lot of conversations, and I was just always really impressed by that.
Yeah, I mean, Baltimore is a city, obviously, with sort of deep mystery roots. I guess you have a claim to Edgar Allan Poe. I'm in Boston, so I have a competing claim, so we can hash that out. But just to talk about Baltimore for a second, so the Los Angeles Times, in reviewing Prom Mom, Paula Woods writes that over a career spanning some 25 years, Laura Lippman has done for Baltimore what Walter Mosley did for Los Angeles, used crime fiction to explore the complicated heart of a place that confounds easy nicknames like Charm City. Laura, your family has deep literary roots in Baltimore in the journalism and bookselling communities. What can you say about the role of the city itself in your writing?
Well, there's kind of been two phases. I started writing when I was full-time at the newspaper.
Right.
When I was a newspaper reporter, I had a relationship with the city that was much more expansive. I understood the various systems at work. If I wasn't covering something, a friend was covering something. I really did feel when I was at a newspaper that I had my finger on the pulse and I could tell a lot of different stories. Over the past 20 years now, increasingly, I've been just another resident. I'm not active in politics. I don't go to a lot of boards or meetings the way I did when I was a reporter. So I now experience much more on a very individual citizen level. I mean, I think it's fascinating on all the levels, and it's good to know some of its history. But, the thing about Baltimore is that, I mean, obviously, I'm really honored by Paula's review, and I hope that I've told part of the Baltimore story. But there's so many Baltimores. I've been quoted before as saying, if you think about a jazz standard like My Funny Valentine, there are many, many versions of that, right? No one owns one. There's no definitive one. So I'm writing about the Baltimore that I know, and that relates to both my race, my gender, my age, because I'm in my 60s. So the Baltimore I'm writing about is often a Baltimore remembered, because, that's how you get when you age. You keep talking about how things used to be. And I certainly, they're like other Baltimores I couldn't write about. We have an amazing writer named Dee Watkins, who grew up in East Baltimore in a pretty troubled neighborhood, sort of saved himself through his writing. Dee writes a different kind of Baltimore story. I don't think everyone knows that Ta-Nehisi Coates grew up here, and that his father, who was a Black Panther and then a publisher, is a really interesting Baltimore character. So that's just like 3 right there, and there are more and more and more and more and more. So, I mean, I'm doing my Baltimore, and my Baltimore could never be the singular Baltimore, the only Baltimore, and I always try to remember that.
That's a great way of pulling. I think that's a great perspective. Julia, what's your perspective on sort of Baltimore Lit? Do you sort of feel like there is sort of a distinctive, understanding what Laura is saying about these different Baltimores and these different takes on Baltimore, different Baltimore stories? Do you feel like there is sort of a cohesiveness to literature coming out of Baltimore in some way?
I gotta go with Laura here, that it's people have extremely different Baltimore experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so to write about it authentically, there's not going to be a general, consensus. But I will say, even in the tougher stories, I think that there's a love for Baltimore that comes through in the writing. And I think that is across the board, even when they're more difficult kind of memoirs or biographies.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think Baltimore transplants who I've known who have come up here to Boston oftentimes hold on to their Baltimore identities for a very long time. It seems like the type of thing that doesn't leave you. Let's talk a little bit about Prom Mom. So out yesterday, Laura's we've got all of our props. We're professionals. Laura's 29th book. So first of all, for those who haven't heard about it yet, we're posting the link to the LA Times review, which was great. For those who haven't heard about it yet, Laura, will you give us the elevator pitch? What's this book?
Sure. This is a book about a woman who 20 years ago gave birth prematurely to a baby that she tells everyone she didn't even know existed. Baby didn't live. She went to a juvenile facility, and while her date was somewhat scorned, he wasn't considered to be involved because he was actually off chasing after his old girlfriend while his prom date was having a baby in a hotel bathroom. And now it's 20 years later, and she never thought she'd come back to Baltimore, but she has. And she realizes that she wants to stay. And I don't know when she realizes it, but the reader realizes very soon that she's still very much interested, perhaps even obsessed, with the boy who took her to that prom 20 years ago. And this all begins in the fall of 2019.
which is a significant time. And I guess that's one follow-up question that I have here. I mean, is this a pandemic novel? Is this a novel that you wrote during the pandemic? Is this a novel that was in some sense inspired by the pandemic? I mean, the pandemic is in the novel, the impact of the pandemic on the commercial real estate market and things like that. Is this a pandemic book?
I'm not sure I would call it a pandemic book, but it is a book set against the backdrop of the pandemic. The pandemic isn't the subject. I had a goal for myself that it's a book in which there's never any foreshadowing. You don't have to foreshadow because the reader actually knows everything that happens. So you don't have characters listening to the radio and hearing a news report about this strange thing that's happening in China. It's just people going about their lives, and their lives happen to include the pandemic, and that shapes their lives, but it doesn't define their lives. So it wasn't perhaps the calculation that most people would make to write a book set during these months that we already want to forget. But one thing that was interesting to me is that while I began the book in early 2021, and this is a book that spans from the fall of 2019 into the early spring of 2021. Even while I was writing it, that became like a bygone era. It became almost historic because it's pre-vaccination rollout for most people.
Yeah.
So I felt like I was writing about something that felt like it had happened very long ago. But something that I think was significant to the writing of the book is if you can bear to remember what 2021 was like, we thought it was going to get better. We were all beginning to move around more, travel more, go out more. Schools were coming back. And then Omicron hit. And I wrote a big portion of this book during those really, like, kind of literally and figuratively dark days of Omicron.
Yeah.
It was late, it was like the early winter into winter, and it was just miserable because it felt like we'd gotten to go outside. It felt like, you're like in a prison and you went outside and you saw the sky and they're like, no, come back in, it's not done yet. And so I think that really affected the writing of this book, that I was writing from that perspective of, my characters at the end of the book are probably people who are relatively hopeful about the pandemic and the world at large, if not for their own lives. But I knew, and the readers would know, that no, nothing was done yet. There was more to come.
Yeah. Nancy, thank you for your comment. We love all of Flora's books as well, as do lots and lots and lots of other people. I think some of the most beloved books are the dozen books that you've written about Tess Monahan. And this is not a Tess Monahan book. I'm sort of always interested in mystery writers who sort of write, we had CJ Box on the show and he talked about Joe Pickett. I've heard William Kent Kruger talk about Cork O'Connor. Some of these characters who come back again and again, who are followed over time, follow over decades. And I'm sort of interested in the relationship that authors have with these characters. Laura, you've written a dozen, I believe, Tess Monahan books. This is a standalone. You've written a number of other standalones. What's your relationship with Tess at this point?
Well, Tess is still sort of my secret best friend, my secret friend that I talk to in my head. But I haven't written a full novel about her since 2015 because I don't have ideas that work for her. And, a Tess Monahan in my mind is a Tess Monahan novel in my mind is a very particular kind of story, one that's not only a mystery, but one that usually reflects some kind of growth or change in Tess's life itself. And Tess is now a mom to a young child. And it's really hard to write crime novels about people who are raising young children because I think I don't have any tolerance for her taking risk now. I'd like to bring her back. I'd like to bring her back and give her a proper ending, whether it be in one book or a series of books. And I'm not going to bring her back until I know how to do that. I have to be able to see the end. I got into this business. It's been a long time. I started publishing in 97. I finished my first book in 95. And back then it was series. You need to be writing a series. And you needed to write a book a year. And that was sort of the conventional wisdom at the time. And then around, I've got to do the math. I want to say it was in 2000, 2001, two of the writers of my, I'm older than they are, but we all started publishing around the same time, so we consider ourselves the same generation. Harlan Coben and Dennis Lehane both had big successes by stepping out of their series. And then it was standalone, 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 standalone. And I've never really followed the conventional wisdom, whatever it is. It sounds really corny. I really do follow my heart in terms of what I want to write. I mean, because, nobody would have said in 2021, oh yeah, write a book with COVID as the background. That'll really be what people want to read. But yeah, so I've been kind of, and I think series are always robust and they never go away. I recently had, and I know you're going to ask me about this later, but I'm just going to talk about it now. I recently had the good luck to read Bad Influence, which is a book in a series that Robert Parker established it's his only female protagonist, Sunny Randall, a PI in Boston. And my friend Allison Galen has now become the first woman to write that series through the estate. And I was reminded reading that book of everything that made me fall in love with private eye fiction, which is why I started writing private eye fiction, because I was in love with it. And it's got so many wonderful features. And, I hope to keep doing this for a while. And I know I'll see other things come and go. And people are always saying this kind of book now and that kind of book. And I just kind of stay here on my own path and I write what I think is right for me to write.
That's fantastic. I think that's a great response. Julia, I'm going to come to you with a question about that, about sort of the market aspect of this. I do first want to remind the audience, both those of you live with us now and those of you in future time, that the show exists to support independent booksellers, and we are dropping links for you to head over to Greedy Reads to pick up a copy of PROM MOM, Laura Lippman's other works, and lots of other great stuff. So go ahead and do that if you can. Julia, a lot of the people who watch the show are writers and aspiring writers and people who are interested in sort of how the market works to the degree that anybody even understands how the market works. Laura's talking a little bit about some of the shifting perspectives on the mystery market, series, standalones, etc. I'm curious as to kind of what you've seen over your time, both as a publicist and in independent book selling, and sort of what direction you think that the mystery market is going in now.
Oh, wow. Well, that's a good question. I mean, me personally, I'm a fan of standalones. It's just what I've read, and that's just my personal preference. But, I think people get invested in series. They love the characters. They love Tess Monahan. I mean, we have people coming in starting from the first Tess Monahan book, and they come back every couple of months and get the next one, and they go through the whole series. So I think there's nothing better than reading a book that you love and knowing that there's 9, 10, 11, however many more to go. So I think that's a really beautiful thing. It's a little bit more difficult if you're not in from the beginning for a bookstore. It's hard to kind of catch a series in the middle. But in terms of mysteries, or where mysteries in general, I tend not to, when I'm buying for the store, I don't really think in genre. I don't know, maybe this sounds idealized or whatever, but I try to take every book on its own merits. And
no, I love that. I mean, that's something I love to talk about with booksellers, is sort of what is the relationship with genre. I think the authors oftentimes have a mixed relationship with it. I think authors can find it, on the one hand, it's a sort of a pipeline to a readership, but on the other hand, I think some authors can find it limiting. I'm always sort of interested in what booksellers think. We spoke to a bookseller in Maine last year who I think just doesn't categorize by genre, and it was like color coding their bookshelves based on like the color of the spine of the book. And like that was just
I think there would be a revolt if I tried to color code the bookstore. I will say that when I opened, I did not have any sections. I mean, I had a fiction and a nonfiction section, and my whole idea was to have people come in and browse, and by not breaking things out by genre, you would stumble on something that looked interesting that you would not see otherwise.
Yeah.
If you're not going to necessarily go to the mystery section. I did have to amend that system a little bit. And I do actually have sections in the store now, but the stores are still set up to encourage browsing and kind of roaming between sections. And so, you know, when I have a stack of books here that are like the stack that I'm hand selling the most in the store right now, and they come from there's a memoir, there's a horror, you know, and that's how I like to read. And so that's how I try to set up the store, because I think it's the most fun. And I think it's what makes indies, right? Everyone is different and everyone kind of has its own mixture of books. But yeah, you know, I did have to eventually create a mystery section.
Did you? Was it because
it's very popular? So it's all good.
Yeah, people want it. I mean, people want it. That's what people want, and people self-identify. I mean, it's the great thing about a great book club is it forces you out of your comfort zone. I would say, like, oh, I'm not a sci-fi reader, but then, you know, we'll read a sci-fi for book club, and, you know, it forces you out of your comfort zone. So yeah, it's fascinating. Laura, we've talked a little bit about PROM MOM and sort of the relationship to the pandemic. I wonder if we could also talk about it in a relationship to other kind of recent cultural developments. I wanted to ask you about your depiction of Joe Simpson in the book. This is the cad dad to the PROM MOM in the media. He is sort of the male, the central male character. He is a gosh, I don't want to characterize your characters for you. He is and I also don't want to do any spoilers. So I will just say he is a privileged and self-involved man. Is that fair? Can I say that?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a certain kind of man who has had a pretty frictionless life.
Yeah.
And he has grown to feel that is due to him. He's owed that because he's always had it, which I think that's actually a topic that fascinates me in American life, which is the way people feel if they lose something that they've had, some kind of stature or standing. If you've ever been in an airport and been bumped from the short line to the long line, it's kind of like that.
Oh yeah.
So I think Joe is very much one of those people who's like he's experienced very little in terms of obstruction, despite this horrible thing that happens when he's 18. He has a pretty charmed path through life, and he doesn't see it as charmed. He sees it as something he deserves, and isn't. He is. I mean, the thing about Joe Simpson is that he's generally a nice person in his own way, except he often does things that aren't very nice. But if you ask him, he would be like, I'm a nice guy. I'm one of the good guys.
He thinks he's a good guy, yeah.
And I think his own wife would describe him as one of the good guys, as well as she knows him. And they both sort of have this shared quest that, I mean, since they've met in college, it's always been like, well, okay, this bad thing happened to you, and some people think you're a bad person, but it's never too late to start being good. And his goodness is important not only to him, but to his wife. They're both really invested in the idea that they're good people. And so that always interests me, because I'm terrified of people who think that they're good. I just think they're so
Oh yeah, that's wonderful. Well, for one thing, he makes me think of the famous perfect Ann Richards quote of somebody being born on third base and thinking they hit a triple, which I think is just, kind of like one of the all-time great lines. But I think one question I have for you is, I feel like my perspective on a character like this is very different from what it might have been 10 years ago. And I wonder if you sort of feel like your view of characters like this, of men like this, has evolved with the Me Too movement, has evolved, or whether this is a character that you could have written back in 1998.
Could I have written him back in 1998? Because I think this character has always existed. I note in the author's note that to some extent he was inspired by John Updike's Harry Angstrom, who's also, a golden boy, an athlete, who experiences himself as being relatively good no matter what mistakes he makes. And so I saw that. I mean, I invoked that comparison. So, yeah, I mean, I think every generation has its Joes. It's just that we see them differently now. And I mean, Joe is, it's not the heart of the book, that's for sure. But he is this character that all the other characters in the book are sort of focused on. So many people really care about Joe. And I think that's fairly consistent. I don't think that's a new phenomenon. And I think what's new is the idea of someone saying, well, wait a minute, why do we care about Joe? Why does he deserve our attention? Why does sort of, what has he done to earn the fealty of so many people? I mean, he's like his mom, he's her favorite kid. He's got this incredibly devoted wife. And he just kind of floats along, and his only concern seems to be that he wants to be liked. He would never want anyone not to like him. And he never wants to be responsible for anything, right? Whatever it is, he just can't be responsible. And he does what he can to evade responsibility.
Yeah, and I think he sort of strikes me as somebody who sort of believes that he deserves to be taken seriously, deserves to be successful, deserves to be liked in a very sort of unreflective way. And I think what you're sort of saying is that there have always been men like that, but that maybe the culture is shifting to say, well, wait a minute, like, are you deserving of everything you think that you're entitled to?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. Julia, have you seen a shift in terms of the readership as you think about the store, thinking about the last, we'll say 5 years, 4 years, 5 years, as you think about things like the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement? Have you seen a shift in terms of reader preferences, what readers are looking for, what readers want in a book, and also books that readers are less interested in, the things that readers are just less tolerant of or less open to?
And that's a trick question for me because I opened 5 years ago. So, I had a real kind of macro view of the book world when I worked in publishing and a real kind of micro view of it now. I think the community that I'm in is engaged and progressive and interested in equity and stories of, bad men. I can't really say that I've seen a difference because I've only been open for 5 years, but I think that kind of uncritical view of the people that have always been the main character, there's not a whole lot of interest in that. From my experience anymore. Yeah. There are still books by and about white men, but that kind of uncritical nature of it, I think there's been a reckoning with that.
I think that's a good way of putting it, sort of the uncritical, unreflective sort of nature of it. I think that makes sense. Laura, a little bit more of a craft question for you, maybe, if I could. So we're talking about Prom Mom, but I also want to sort of make mention of this book, Seasonal Work, which came out last year, I believe, and is a fabulous collection of short stories. I am, to me, I'm really, okay, for one thing I will say, I have a real soft spot for short mystery stories. I mean, the first mysteries I ever read were Arthur Conan Doyle when I was a kid. I love sort of a short mystery. They also strike me as just incredibly difficult to craft. When I sometimes think about mystery writing like boxing, and you're sort of trying to hit the reader with a punch they don't see coming. And I sort of feel like a novel is like a long boxing match where you're sort of dancing around each other and feeling each other out and doing this stuff. And a short story just strikes me as something where you've just got to get in there and go like bam, bam, bam. Like you just need the setup, you need the twist, you need the knockout punch just so fast. I mean, what is your take? Is it just a fundamentally different thing for you to write a great short story?
I mean, I think crime short stories are really, really hard to write. And probably pretty much do need a twist. I don't think every crime story needs a twist, but they need surprises, but they don't always have to twist. But I do think that the short story relies on a shocking revelation late in the story. something that kind of sets everything, it kind of unsets everything that you thought that you knew. They're hard to write, and I don't write a lot of them. I've been writing for 25 years, and I have 2 collections of short stories, and I've slowed down a lot. I tend to write short stories when someone comes to me and says, I got this anthology. Do you have an idea? Would you contribute? And if I do have an idea, I'll say yes. And sometimes I'll be like, no, I can't even imagine what I would write for that. I mean, I probably haven't written a short story now for, it's been at least 18 months. And I think it was the final story in the collection, Seasonal Work, was the last thing that I wrote. So they're really hard. And I think part of the reason I would rather, in the time that it takes me to work on a short story, I can probably write a really big chunk of a novel.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to justify it sometimes, but I do like the form. I think it's really challenging. I think it's really interesting. And, you know, I feel like I learn things when I do it, but boy, it does not come easily.
I believe you've written a Holmes, haven't you? For Laura King, have you done?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
But in that case, I didn't feel like I could go deep enough on Sherlock Holmes. So instead, I wrote a story about a preteen who just starts walking around in a deerstalker cap and begins investigating the mysteries around her parents, and has a sad realization that you know about who her parents are and what their secrets are, and decides that maybe sleuthing isn't the thing she wants to do.
You have some great, you've got some great adolescent characters, including in the title story in the Seasonal Work collection. Some lovely adolescent characters. How do you think about writing adolescents? Do you think about that fundamentally different from when you're writing somebody like Tess, or is it just basically the same process?
I mean, for years I just pulled on my memories of adolescence. They're never far away for most of us. I think most of us remember what those years were like, and now, lucky me, I have a 13-year-old under my own roof, so I have someone right there who can help me whenever I need help.
Yeah, it is. I've got a couple of teenagers in my house now, and it is handy when you're trying to write an adolescent character to have that voice in your kitchen or whatever. So, people in the audience would like to know, Laura, about your next work. I don't know if you're timing. I know you just put out a book yesterday, so it seems a little bit cruel to be like, all right, well, what's next? But I don't know if you want to talk about it, but anything you want to say about what's coming?
I mean, first of all, it's going to be done by September 1st. So I'm on what is probably the 3rd draft, and I'll get through a 4th draft before it's due. It's really different. And that's, again, something I tend to do. I just can't write similar books back to back because it would be, it just wouldn't work for me. I wouldn't be interested. So having written this very, very dark book, which it is a dark book, and the people are challenging, and it's not going to give anybody the warm fuzzies, that's for sure. But I was like, I need to write the most different book I can. So I actually decided to take a minor character from the Tess Monahan series, who's been established in that world as a widow. And I keep calling her an older woman. She's 4 years older than I am. So it's just like, yeah, don't forget. But I wanted to write a book that I've been describing as a mashup between the film Charade and the children's novel from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Bosley Frankweiler. And it's about a woman she's taking a big trip on her own for the first time in her life ever, because some circumstances in her life have made that possible. She just wants to get on a boat in Paris and cruise up the Seine. And everyone thinks she's got some connection to this stolen Pakistani antiquity. And she's like, I obviously do not have a statue in my suitcase. I would know. I just want to go on my trip. Leave me alone. And so it's a very different novel, and it's about a shy, timid woman learning to spread her wings, learning to become bolder. And it's really been fun. It did what I needed it to do, which is like, oh my God, I've got to spend the last year with such a nice person. She's so nice. She's based on someone quite dear to me. And, so it's been, I can't, I'm shocked as anyone that I have another book. I'm like, how did I do that? But yet there it is.
There it is. That's fantastic. That's wonderful. Congratulations. That's very exciting. Um, Julia, I'm asking Laura about what the future holds, but I also want to turn to you. The book industry has been in tremendous flux, I guess, to say the least, as has independent bookselling. You've been on multiple sides. You own Gritty Reads, but you've also worked in the publishing industry. Where do you see things going over the next 5 to 10? I know that's a terrible, terrible question to ask anybody in publishing, but I'm going to do it.
Next 5 to 10 years.
Where do you see things going, and where do you see the role of, specifically the role of independent bookselling? How do you see that evolving as time moves on?
I can say over the next 5 to 10 days, we're all just very happy that UPS is not going.
Right. All right. Yeah.
There's been a resurgence of indie bookstores, and it was starting before the pandemic, and kind of paradoxically really boomed during the pandemic, which seems odd, but it just makes sense. People realize what they want in their communities and what they miss, and when they can't go, and what they wish were there once it's gone. So I think that it's a good time in the world for indie bookstores. I mean, it's hard to feel optimistic about, honestly, too much at this moment in time, but I think there was a real turning back to indie bookstores. I think there was a shiny object for a while, and people got kind of seduced by it. But there's been a real return. And I hope that is true for all small retail. I mean, I personally like having a neighborhood that I live in that has things in it, that I can go out and get eggs and toilet paper and a book, and so I hope that that's true for all of them. But I do think that there has been a real shift in attitude in people being willing to pay full price for books, which was a really, obviously not everybody can do that, but there's a reason that indie bookstores charge what they charge. We're not getting rich off of it. I can promise that. But I think there's been a real kind of return to wanting to support these businesses that are part of the community. I think that's a generally good thing. I feel optimistic about that.
Oh yeah. Is that your take as well, Laura?
Yeah, and I think one thing that really fascinates me, because obviously we're talking a lot about AI now, and can AI write books? I mean, corrected text is a form of AI, and I was like, my phone doesn't even know what I'm trying to spell most of the time. But what I think is really interesting is that there's been no online retailer who's been able to create anything that begins to capture what real browsing is like. And like anyone knows, if you've ever been on any website that does recommendations based off of what you've been searching for, the recommendations are generally not good and not interesting. You cannot.
They're all the same everywhere.
Yeah, you cannot capture what human booksellers do. You just can't. There is nothing as much fun as the staff selections.
Oh yeah.
There's just that's the thing that makes a bookstore a really special place, and that's why I like to go to bookstores. I don't need help finding the books I already know about. It's kind of funny because we have another local bookstore today, another local bookstore in Baltimore called the Ivy, and I had to go in and sign some stock there today, and I walked out with the complete poems of Jim Harrison and this other novel. I was like, yeah, I think my friend Anne told me about these novels. And then there was some other poetry books. And I mean, that's me in every bookstore I ever go into, is I don't just walk out with what if I always knew what I wanted, I would just order everything online, but I want to know what's there that I don't know about. And that's what physical bookstores, especially independent ones that have been created and formed by individuals, that's what they do better than anyone. It cannot be replaced.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And people want the authentic connections. I mean, I was in Wellesley, my local independent bookstore, Wellesley Books, today. And, I know the booksellers, they know me. I go to the book club there every month. I mean, people want those authentic connections. People want to talk to other people about books and about what they like and what they're excited about, and not just deal, as you say, with an algorithm that's going to try to sell me like batteries based on some device I bought last month, and then also, by the way, like a book or whatever. So I think that's exactly right. Speaking of selling books, we have reached the time in our show when we will do exactly that. Reminder to the audience: we are here this week for only one reason, or really two reasons. We want to talk about Prom Mom, but also we support independent book selling, and this week it's Greedy Reads in Baltimore. So there's going to be links popping up for every book that we mention for you to pick up a copy from Greedy Reads. And please, if you can, do so. Julia, you're the professional, so we're going to go to you first. What books do you have to recommend? What are you excited about right now?
Okay, I pulled a little stack, and these are the books that I'm hand selling the most in the store, other than, of course, Prom Mom. Okay, so here we go. This Thing Between Us is a little bit older, came out a couple of years ago. It is part of the new kind of literary horror boom that's happening, which we love. It was scary as heck. I read it on a plane and tortured my seatmate by like clutching her hand. But it's about grief, and it's about assimilation, and it, just scary, but very deep and wonderful. The Man Who Could Move Clouds is a memoir that reads like the most magical of magical realism novels. She doesn't like that term. The author does not like that term, but I don't really know how else to describe it. I discovered this. We read it in book club, and I absolutely fell in love with it. So I also learned from my booksellers. Stay True, memoir by Washu, really beautiful. Just a very lyrical, harkening back to his college days. It's a tragic story. His friend was killed, but it's a really beautiful book. And then two recent novels, The Guest by Emma Cline and Yellowface by R.F. Kwan. Yellowface is a kind of sharp and nasty satire set in the publishing world with one of the most unlikable main characters I can remember reading about. But The Guest, not to be outdone, is also a very unlikable main character. However, I always say that the ability to write a likable book about unlikable characters is magic. Laura does that a lot too. But so those are my recommendations.
Fantastic. All right, the links are in the chat. Laura, what are you feeling excited about these days?
I only have one book at hand. I got it at Greedy Reads. Monsters by Claire Detterer. It's a book that I absolutely love. I think it's essential reading pretty much for everybody, but especially for creative people. I think it's especially for women who are trying to write. There's a whole chapter about, are you monster enough? I love that. I mentioned Bad Influence by Allison Galen. The book that I just finished is a galley that won't be out for a while, but it's pretty fantastic. It's called This American Ex-Wife, and it's written by the writer Liz Lenz, and it combines her memoir, but also a lot of reporting about what women get and don't get out of marriage. And it's a really interesting, moving book. I thought it was fantastic. Let's see. I know I've been reading Lessons in Chemistry like everybody else. That book makes me cheerful because here's a first novel by someone in her 60s who had this huge hit. And finally, I'm just starting it's somewhere near here. The Curtis Sittenfeld, the last.
Romantic comedy.
Romantic comedy. That's it. So that's the reading I'm doing right now.
Fantastic. Great book recommendations. Thank you both for those. Those are all in the chat. So those of you with us now, those of you watching this video in future time, head to Greedy Reads, pick up some books. Be sure to pick up this book, pick up Prom Mom, the latest and 29th book by Laura Lippman. Emma Straub says it is surprising, transgressive, and sexy, and she would follow Laura anywhere, even to the prom, which is a great blurb. It's been completely delightful to speak to the two of you. Thank you both so much for being here today. Laura, congratulations on this book and on the one that is almost done. It'll be very exciting to see what that is. Julia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And it's delightful to visit Greedy Reads in Baltimore. To the audience, thank you for being here with us. Thank you for supporting independent bookselling. Come back next week. We will be here. I will be in conversation with author Amy Gibbs about Carnival of Curiosities. It'll be great. And keep sticking around because we are just barely over a month away from reaching our goal of visiting all 50 states, plus DC and Puerto Rico. Visiting Maryland was state number 49. So you're putting us within striking distance. But on September 6th, we will be in Oklahoma to make it 50. So to the audience, thank you for being here. Keep on coming back. Keep on supporting independent booksellers. Stay well and keep reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.